Sarah Martinez had always dreamed of serving her country. Growing up in a small Texas town, she watched military parades with wide eyes and promised herself that one day she would wear the uniform with pride. That day came when she turned 18 and enlisted in the Army. Now, 3 years later, she stood at the gates of Fort Henderson, ready to begin her new assignment as a communications specialist. The base was larger than any she had served at before. Soldiers moved with purpose across the grounds, their boots creating a rhythmic beat on the concrete pathways. Sarah adjusted her uniform one final time, making sure every crease was perfect and every button gleamed. She had learned early in her military career that attention to detail could make the difference between respect and ridicule. As she walked toward the administration building, Sarah noticed several soldiers pointing in her direction and whispering among themselves. She kept her head high and continued walking, but the uncomfortable feeling in her stomach grew stronger with each step. She had faced this kind of attention before at other bases, and it never led to anything good. Inside the building, Sergeant Williams waited behind a metal desk stacked high with paperwork. He was a large man with graying hair and cold blue eyes that seemed to look right through people. When Sarah approached and saluted, he barely glanced up from his documents. "Private Martinez reporting for duty." "Sir?" she said in her clearest voice. Sergeant Williams finally looked up, his eyes scanning her from head to toe in a way that made Sarah's skin crawl. He stood slowly, his chair creaking under his weight, and walked around the desk to stand directly in front of her. "So you're the new communications girl," he said, his voice carrying a tone of disapproval. "I've heard some interesting things about you, Martinez." Sarah maintained her military posture, staring straight ahead. "I'm here to serve and do my job to the best of my ability, sir." The sergeant laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "We'll see about that. Follow me." He led her through a series of hallways and into a small room where 3 other soldiers were waiting. Sarah recognized the type immediately. They were the kind of soldiers who thought their rank gave them permission to treat others poorly. Their smirks and crossed arms told her everything she needed to know about what was coming next. "Gentlemen, meet our new communications specialist," Sergeant Williams announced. "Private Martinez here has quite the reputation." One of the soldiers, a corporal with dark hair and mean eyes, stepped forward. "We heard you got some interesting artwork under that uniform, Martinez. Some people are saying you might not be the kind of soldier we want representing our unit." Sarah's heart began to race, but she kept her expression neutral. "I don't know what you mean, sir." "I'm here to do my job." "Oh, I think you know exactly what we mean," another soldier chimed in. "See, we've been talking to some guys from your last base. They told us some very interesting stories about what you're hiding under that uniform." The third soldier moved to block the door, and Sarah realized with growing alarm that she was trapped. She had been in difficult situations before, but something about this felt different, more dangerous. Sergeant Williams walked closer until he was standing just inches from her face. "Here's the thing, Martinez. We run a tight ship here, and we don't tolerate soldiers who don't fit our standards. We've heard you've got some markings on your body that might not be appropriate for someone wearing the uniform of the United States Army. My personal choices are my own business, as long as they don't interfere with my duties," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the fear growing inside her. The sergeant's face darkened. "That's where you're wrong, Private. Everything about you is our business when you're wearing that uniform. And right now we need to verify whether the rumors we've heard are true." The corporal stepped forward with a sick smile. "We're going to need you to remove your uniform so we can conduct a proper inspection. Can't have any inappropriate tattoos representing our unit, can we?" Sarah's blood ran cold. She knew this was wrong, knew it was harassment, but she also knew that challenging these men could destroy her military career. She had worked too hard and sacrificed too much to get where she was. "This is highly irregular," she said, trying to keep her voice from shaking. "There are proper procedures for uniform inspections, and this isn't one of them." Sergeant Williams laughed again. "You're new here, Martinez, so let me explain how things work. We make the rules and you follow them. If you refuse to cooperate, we can make your life very difficult. Transfer requests can get lost, performance reviews can be unfavorable. You understand what I'm saying?" The room felt smaller by the minute, and Sarah could hear her heart pounding in her ears. She thought about her family back home, about how proud they had been when she enlisted. She thought about all the young girls who looked up to female soldiers as role models. She couldn't let these men break her, but she also couldn't see a way out. The corporal moved closer, his hand reaching toward her uniform jacket. "Come on, Martinez. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. We just want to take a quick look, make sure you're fit to wear the uniform." Just as Sarah was preparing to make a run for the door, even though it was blocked, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. The soldiers in the room froze, their confident expressions suddenly replaced with uncertainty. The footsteps stopped right outside the door, and a firm knock followed. "Sergeant Williams, I need to speak with you immediately." The voice belonged to someone with clear authority, and Sarah watched as the color drained from Sergeant Williams's face. The other soldiers quickly stepped away from her, suddenly very interested in looking anywhere but at their victim. "Just a minute. Sir?" Sergeant Williams called out, his voice cracking slightly. But the door opened before he could reach it, and a tall figure in a crisp uniform stepped into the room. Sarah couldn't see his face clearly from her position, but the way every soldier in the room immediately snapped to attention told her this was someone very important. The newcomer's eyes swept the room, taking in the scene with obvious displeasure. When his gaze landed on Sarah, still standing rigidly at attention in the center of the room, his expression grew even darker. "What exactly is going on here, Sergeant?" the commander asked, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that made grown men tremble. Colonel James Morrison had been walking past the administration building when he heard raised voices coming from one of the side rooms. As the base commander, he made it his business to know what was happening under his command, especially when it sounded like trouble. What he found when he opened the door made his blood boil. Sergeant Williams scrambled to find words, his face flushed red with embarrassment and fear. "Sir, we were just conducting a routine inspection of our new personnel, making sure Private Martinez here meets our unit standards." Colonel Morrison's steel-gray eyes moved from Williams to the other soldiers, then to Sarah. He had been in the military for 25 years, and he could spot harassment from a mile away. The young woman standing in the center of the room was clearly distressed, despite her attempts to maintain military bearing. "A routine inspection," the colonel repeated slowly, his voice dripping with disbelief. "And this routine inspection requires 4 men in a closed room with 1 female soldier." The corporal who had been reaching for Sarah's uniform tried to speak up. "Sir, we received reports about inappropriate markings that might violate military standards." You were just what, Corporal Davis?" Colonel Morrison cut him off. "Please, enlighten me about these military standards that require a female soldier to remove her uniform in front of male personnel without proper authorization or a female officer present." The room fell deadly silent. Sarah could practically hear the 3 soldiers' careers crashing down around them. She had never seen anyone dress down superior officers with such controlled fury. Colonel Morrison turned his attention to Sarah. "Private Martinez, is it?" "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, grateful that her voice came out steady. "Are you injured or in need of medical attention?" "No, sir." "Good, please wait outside while I have a conversation with these gentlemen." Sarah saluted and walked toward the door, but Colonel Morrison's voice stopped her. "And Private Martinez? You did nothing wrong here. Remember that." As Sarah stepped into the hallway, she could hear the colonel's voice through the closed door, though she couldn't make out the words. The tone, however, was unmistakably furious. She had never heard an officer speak with such controlled rage, and she almost felt sorry for the men inside. 20 minutes later, the door opened and the 3 soldiers filed out, their faces pale and their eyes fixed on the floor. None of them looked at Sarah as they hurried away down the corridor. Sergeant Williams was the last to leave, and Sarah could see sweat stains on his uniform despite the cool air conditioning. Colonel Morrison appeared in the doorway and gestured for Sarah to return. The room felt completely different now, less threatening, more like what it actually was, just another office in a military building. "Please, sit down," the colonel said, his voice much gentler than it had been moments before. He took a seat across from her, and Sarah was surprised to see kindness in his eyes rather than the harsh judgment she had expected. "First, I want to apologize on behalf of this base and the United States Army," he began. "What just happened here was completely unacceptable and will not be tolerated under my command." Sarah didn't know how to respond. In her 3 years of service, no officer had ever apologized to her for anything, let alone the behavior of other soldiers. "Second, I want you to know that those men will face serious consequences for their actions. This kind of harassment has no place in our military, and I will personally ensure that appropriate disciplinary action is taken." Thank you, sir, Sarah managed to say. Colonel Morrison leaned forward slightly. Now I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. Have you experienced this kind of treatment before? Sarah hesitated. Speaking up about harassment could be career suicide, but something about the colonel's demeanor made her feel like she could trust him. Yes, sir. Not exactly like this, but similar situations. Usually it's just comments or looks, but sometimes it gets more serious. The colonel's jaw tightened. Have you ever reported these incidents? No, sir. I was told early in my career that complaining would only make things worse. That I needed to toughen up and deal with it if I wanted to succeed in the military. That advice was wrong, Private Martinez. Dead wrong. Colonel Morrison stood and walked to the window, looking out at the base grounds. I've been in the Army for 25 years, and I've seen too many good soldiers driven out by this kind of behavior. It has to stop. He turned back to face her. I want you to know that you have my full support. If anyone else tries to harass you or treat you inappropriately, I want you to report it immediately, directly to me if necessary. Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her, followed quickly by something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Maybe there were still good people in the military after all. There is one thing I need to address, Colonel Morrison continued, returning to his seat. Those men mentioned something about tattoos. I need to know if there are any markings that might actually violate military regulations. Sarah's stomach dropped. She had hoped this part wouldn't come up. Sir, I do have a tattoo, but it's not visible when I'm in uniform. It's not inappropriate or offensive. Can you describe it for me? Sarah took a deep breath. This was the moment she had been dreading for months. It's a memorial tattoo, sir. For my brother. Colonel Morrison's expression softened. Your brother? He was killed in Afghanistan 2 years ago. He was a sergeant in the Marines. Sarah's voice grew quieter. The tattoo is his dog tags and dates of service, along with a quote he used to say. It's on my ribs, completely covered by my uniform. The colonel was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah worried she had said too much. Memorial tattoos were generally accepted in the military, but some commanders were stricter than others about body art. What was your brother's name? He asked finally. Michael Martinez, sir. Sergeant Michael Martinez, 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marines. Colonel Morrison's eyes widened slightly. The Michael Martinez who saved those villagers in Helmand Province? Who carried 3 wounded soldiers to safety under enemy fire? Sarah's heart nearly stopped. You knew him? I knew of him. His actions earned him a Bronze Star with V device for valor. He was a true hero. The colonel's voice carried deep respect. I'm honored to meet his sister. Tears threatened to spill from Sarah's eyes, but she blinked them back. She had never expected to meet someone who knew about Michael's sacrifice, especially not in a situation like this. Private Martinez, I want to see that tattoo. Colonel Morrison said gently. Not because I doubt your description, but because I think it's important that I understand exactly what those men were trying to use against you. Sarah nodded and began to lift the side of her uniform jacket. Sarah carefully lifted the side of her uniform jacket and pulled up her undershirt, revealing the tattoo that covered most of her left rib cage. Colonel Morrison leaned forward to get a better look, and his expression immediately changed from professional curiosity to something much deeper. The tattoo was beautifully done in black and gray ink. At the center were 2 dog tags with Michael's name, rank, and service dates. Above them, in elegant script, were the words, Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. Below, the dog tags was a detailed image of Marine Corps wings with a banner that read Semper Fi, but it was what Colonel Morrison saw at the bottom of the tattoo that made him catch his breath. There, in small but clear letters, was a date and location that he recognized immediately. Operation Iron Fist, March 15, 2023, Helmand Province. My God, he whispered, sitting back in his chair. I was there. Sarah's eyes widened in shock. What? Colonel Morrison rolled up his sleeve, revealing his own tattoo on his forearm. It was simpler than Sarah's, but the message was unmistakable. The same date and operation name, along with the names of soldiers who hadn't made it home. I was the commanding officer for Operation Iron Fist, he said quietly. Your brother saved my life along with the lives of 12 other soldiers that day. The room fell completely silent as both of them processed this incredible coincidence. Sarah stared at the colonel's tattoo, unable to believe what she was seeing. Tell me what happened, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Colonel Morrison leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant as he remembered that terrible day. We were conducting a search and rescue mission for a downed helicopter crew. Intelligence said the area was clear, but we walked straight into an ambush. Taliban fighters had us pinned down in a valley with no cover and no way out. He paused, collecting his thoughts. I was wounded in the first few minutes, shrapnel in my leg and shoulder. I couldn't move, and neither could several other soldiers. We were sitting ducks. Sarah hung on every word, finally hearing the full story of her brother's final day. Your brother was with a Marine unit that was supposed to be our backup, but they were 2 miles away when the shooting started. When he heard the gunfire, he didn't wait for orders. He grabbed his medic gear and ran toward the sound of battle. Colonel Morrison's voice grew thick with emotion. He reached our position while bullets were still flying. I watched him drag 3 wounded soldiers to safety one by one, completely exposed to enemy fire. He took a bullet in the shoulder during the second rescue, but he kept going. Sarah wiped away tears that were now flowing freely down her cheeks. She had known her brother died a hero, but she had never heard the details. When he came back for me, I told him to leave me and save himself. Do you know what he said? Colonel Morrison looked directly at Sarah. He said, "My sister would never forgive me if I left you behind." Sir? Then he picked me up and carried me 300 yards to safety while machine gun fire erupted all around us. The colonel stood and walked to his desk, pulling out a folder. He went back one more time for the helicopter pilot. That's when the mortar shell hit. He shielded the pilot with his own body and saved that man's life. But his voice trailed off. But he didn't make it. Sarah finished quietly. No, he didn't. But because of his actions, 8 soldiers and 1 pilot went home to their families. 8 families didn't have to receive that terrible phone call. Colonel Morrison returned to his seat and looked at Sarah with new understanding. So when those idiots downstairs thought they could humiliate you over a memorial tattoo for one of the finest soldiers I've ever served with, they had no idea what they were dealing with. Sarah felt a strange mix of grief and pride washing over her. For 2 years, she had carried the weight of her brother's death and the meaning of his sacrifice. To finally meet someone who had been there, who understood what Michael had done, felt like a gift she never expected to receive. There's something else you should know, Colonel Morrison continued. After that mission, I recommended your brother for the Medal of Honor. The paperwork got tied up in bureaucracy, and then when he was killed, it got lost in the shuffle. But I never forgot. He opened the folder on his desk and pulled out several documents. I've been working for 2 years to get his recognition reinstated. Last month, I finally received approval from the Pentagon. Your brother's Medal of Honor ceremony is scheduled for next month. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth in shock. The Medal of Honor was the highest military decoration, reserved for acts of extraordinary heroism. She had dreamed that someday Michael might receive the recognition he deserved, but she never imagined it would actually happen. Your family will be notified officially next week, Colonel Morrison said, but I wanted you to know first, especially after what happened here today. Through her tears, Sarah managed to speak. Thank you, sir. This means everything to our family. It's long overdue. The colonel's expression grew serious again. Now about those soldiers who harassed you today. They thought they were targeting a weak soldier with questionable loyalty. Instead, they tried to humiliate the sister of a Medal of Honor recipient. The irony would be funny if their behavior wasn't so disgusting. Sarah wiped her eyes and straightened her uniform. What happens now, sir? Now you report to your assigned unit and do the job you came here to do. You're one of the finest communications specialists in the Army, according to your records. Your brother would be proud. Colonel Morrison stood and extended his hand. And Private Martinez? If anyone else gives you trouble about that tattoo, you tell them to come see me. I'll be happy to explain exactly what it represents. As Sarah shook his hand, she felt a strength she hadn't experienced in years. For the first time since enlisting, she felt like she truly belonged in the military. She was no longer just Sarah Martinez, the soldier trying to prove herself. She was the sister of a hero, carrying on his legacy of service and sacrifice. One more thing, Colonel Morrison added as she reached the door. I'd like you to consider applying for a promotion to corporal. Your performance reviews have been excellent, and I think the Army could use more soldiers like you in leadership positions. Sarah saluted smartly. I'll consider it, sir. Thank you for everything. As she walked out of the building and onto the base grounds, Sarah felt the warm sun on her face and noticed that other soldiers were looking at her differently now. Word traveled fast on military bases, and she suspected that everyone already knew about her encounter with Sergeant Williams and his crew. But instead of the whispers and pointing she had experienced earlier, she now saw nods of respect and even a few salutes from passing soldiers. Colonel Morrison had clearly made it known that she was under his protection, and in the military, that kind of endorsement meant everything. The next morning, Sarah reported to the communications center at 600 hours sharp. The building was buzzing with activity as soldiers prepared for the day's operations. As she walked through the main corridor, she noticed something different in how people looked at her. Instead of the suspicious glances she had grown accustomed to, she saw respectful nods and genuine smiles. Staff Sergeant Lisa Chen, her new supervisor, was waiting at the main communications desk. She was a compact woman with intelligent eyes and a reputation for running one of the most efficient communications units in the Army. "Private Martinez," Staff Sergeant Chen said with a warm smile. "Welcome to the best communications team on this base. I've heard quite a lot about you." Sarah felt her stomach tighten slightly. "Yes, ma'am. I hope it was good things." "All good things," Chen assured her. "Your technical skills are impressive, and Colonel Morrison personally recommended you for our advanced satellite communications project." That doesn't happen often. Relief flooded through Sarah as she realized that her reputation was being defined by her abilities rather than yesterday's incident. She followed Staff Sergeant Chen through the communications center, noting the sophisticated equipment and the focused professionalism of the soldiers working at various stations. "This is your primary workstation," Chen explained, stopping at a complex array of monitors and communication equipment. "You'll be responsible for maintaining contact with 3 forward operating bases in hostile territory. These soldiers depend on clear, reliable communication for their safety and mission success." The weight of responsibility settled on Sarah's shoulders, but it felt good. This was the kind of meaningful work she had joined the Army to do. "Private Johnson will show you the basic protocols," Chen continued, gesturing to a young soldier nearby. "But according to your records, you'll probably be teaching him a few things within a week." As Sarah began her orientation, she couldn't help but notice the difference in how her new colleagues treated her. There were no inappropriate comments, no suspicious looks, and no questions about her qualifications. For the first time in her military career, she felt like she was being judged solely on her abilities as a soldier. Around mid-morning, while Sarah was learning the satellite communication protocols, a commotion erupted near the main entrance. She looked up to see Sergeant Williams entering the communications center, flanked by 2 military police officers. His uniform had been stripped of several badges and insignia, and his face was a mask of barely controlled rage. Staff Sergeant Chen immediately approached the group. "Sergeant Williams, you're not authorized to be in this facility." Williams glared past, Chen directly at Sarah. "I need to retrieve some personal items from my old office," he said through gritted teeth. One of the MP officers stepped forward. "He has 5 minutes to collect his belongings under supervision. Then he's to report to the base commander's office." As Williams walked past Sarah's workstation, he leaned down and whispered, "This isn't over, Martinez. You think you're special because you got protection from above? You'll slip up eventually, and when you do, I'll be waiting." Sarah kept her eyes focused on her equipment, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a reaction, but she felt the familiar knot of anxiety forming in her stomach. She had won this battle, but Williams was right about one thing. There would likely be others who shared his attitude. After Williams left with his box of personal items, Staff Sergeant Chen approached Sarah's station. "Are you all right?" "Yes, ma'am. Just focusing on my work." Chen studied her for a moment. "Martinez, I want you to know something. I've been in the Army for 12 years, and I've seen too many good soldiers get driven out by bullies like Williams. But I've also seen the tide changing. There are more leaders like Colonel Morrison now, people who care more about competence than prejudice." She pulled up a chair next to Sarah's workstation. "Your brother was Michael Martinez, wasn't he?" Sarah looked up in surprise. "Yes, ma'am." "How did you know?" "Word travels fast, especially when it involves a Medal of Honor recipient. I served in Afghanistan during the same period. I didn't know your brother personally, but his reputation was legendary among communications personnel. They said he always made sure his radio operators got recognition, for keeping him connected to support when things got dangerous. A warm feeling spread through Sarah's chest. Even now, 2 years after his death, Michael was still protecting her and opening doors. The point is, Chen continued, you've got some big shoes to fill, but I think you're up for it. Don't let people like Williams make you forget why you're here. The rest of the morning passed quickly as Sarah immersed herself in learning the communication systems. The work was complex and challenging, requiring constant attention to detail and quick thinking. It was exactly the kind of intellectual challenge she thrived on. During lunch break, she was surprised when several soldiers from other units approached her table in the mess hall. She tensed, expecting trouble, but their intentions were clearly friendly. "You're Martinez, right?" asked a tall corporal with a friendly smile. "I'm Rodriguez from the motor pool. I heard what happened yesterday with Williams and his crew." Sarah nodded cautiously, unsure where this conversation was heading. "I just wanted you to know that not all of us are like that," Rodriguez continued. "A lot of us have been waiting for someone to finally put Williams in his place. He's been harassing soldiers for years." A female sergeant sitting nearby chimed in. "I'm Thompson from Supply. Williams tried the same garbage with me last year. I didn't have the courage to report it, but I'm glad you stood your ground." Soon, Sarah found herself surrounded by soldiers sharing their own stories about Williams and expressing their relief that someone had finally faced consequences for the harassment. She realized that the incident had done more than just protect her. It had sent a message to the entire base that this kind of behavior would no longer be tolerated. After lunch, Sarah returned to the communications center to find Colonel Morrison waiting at her workstation. Staff Sergeant Chen was standing nearby with an expression of barely contained excitement. "Private Martinez," the colonel said formally, "I have some news regarding your brother's Medal of Honor ceremony." Sarah snapped to attention. "Yes, sir. The ceremony has been moved up to this Friday. The president himself will be presenting the award at the White House, and your family is invited to attend." Sarah felt her knees go weak. The President of the United States was going to personally honor her brother. It seemed almost impossible to believe. "There's more," Colonel Morrison continued. "The Army would like you to be present at the ceremony as the representative of your family. You'll be flown to Washington, D.C. tomorrow morning." "Sir, I don't know what to say." "Say yes, Private. Your brother earned this recognition, and you deserve to be there to receive it on behalf of your family." Staff Sergeant Chen stepped forward with a smile. "Don't worry about your duties here. We'll cover your responsibilities while you're gone. This is much more important." As Sarah struggled to process this incredible news, she thought about how much her life had changed in just 24 hours. Yesterday, she had been facing harassment and humiliation. Today, she was being honored as the sister of a hero and preparing to meet the President of the United States. "There's one more thing," Colonel Morrison added. "The military liaison who will escort you to the ceremony specifically requested your assignment. Apparently, he served with your brother in Afghanistan and has been looking forward to meeting Michael's sister." Sarah felt tears threatening again, but this time they were tears of joy and pride rather than pain and fear. Her brother's legacy was not just protecting her, it was opening doors she never could have imagined. The flight to Washington, D.C. was Sarah's first time on a military transport aircraft. As she looked out the small window at the clouds below, she couldn't help but think about how Michael would have reacted to all of this. He had always been the one to receive recognition and awards, while she had been content to stay in the background and support him from afar. Major David Harper, her military escort, sat across from her reviewing ceremony protocols. He was a tall man with kind eyes and a Purple Heart ribbon on his chest that told its own story of sacrifice and service. "Your brother saved my life too," Major Harper said suddenly, looking up from his paperwork. "I was the helicopter pilot that Michael shielded during that mortar attack." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Every day seemed to bring new connections to her brother's final heroic act. "I've been carrying guilt about his death for 2 years," Harper continued. "If he hadn't come back for me, he would still be alive. When I heard his sister was in the Army and would be attending the ceremony, I specifically requested to be your escort. I wanted to meet you and, well, to say thank you." "Major, my brother made his choice," Sarah said gently. "He wouldn't want you to carry guilt about his decision to save your life. That's who he was, someone who couldn't leave people behind." Harper nodded, but she could see the emotion in his eyes. "The doctor said I had maybe 10 minutes before I would have bled out. Michael gave me 40 more years of life. I've been wondering how to honor that gift. Live it well, Sarah said simply. That's all he would have wanted. When they landed at Andrews Air Force Base, Sarah was surprised to find a small welcoming committee waiting for them. A Navy lieutenant commander approached with a crisp salute. Private Martinez, I'm Commander Patricia Wells. I'll be accompanying you to the White House tomorrow. Tonight you'll be staying at the Navy Lodge, and tomorrow morning we'll help you prepare for the ceremony. The Navy Lodge was nicer than any hotel Sarah had ever stayed in during her military service. Her room overlooked the Potomac River, and for the first time in months she felt truly relaxed. That evening, Commander Wells took her to dinner at a restaurant near the base, where they were joined by several other military officers who had served with Michael or had been present during Operation Iron Fist. As Sarah listened to their stories about her brother, she began to understand the full scope of his impact. He hadn't just saved lives that day. He had inspired a generation of soldiers to be better, braver, and more committed to the values the military represented. Your brother had this way of making everyone around him want to be heroes too, said Captain Maria Santos, who had served as Michael's commanding officer. He never asked anyone to do anything he wouldn't do himself, and he never left anyone behind, no matter how dangerous the situation. The funny thing is, added Lieutenant Colonel Brown, Michael always talked about his little sister back home. He said you were the toughest person he knew and that you inspired him to be brave. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. She had always thought Michael was the brave one, the hero of the family. To learn that he had drawn strength from her was almost overwhelming. The next morning, Commander Wells helped Sarah prepare for the ceremony. Her dress uniform had been specially fitted and pressed to perfection. Every ribbon and badge was placed with military precision, and Sarah had never felt more proud to wear the uniform of the United States Army. Remember, Commander Wells said as they prepared to leave for the White House, this ceremony isn't just about honoring your brother. It's about honoring all the soldiers who serve with that same spirit of sacrifice and dedication. You represent all of them today. The White House was even more impressive than Sarah had imagined. Security was tight, but the staff treated her with enormous respect and courtesy. She was escorted to a private room where she could collect herself before the ceremony. A few minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin, there was a soft knock on the door. Sarah opened it to find President Harrison himself, along with a small entourage of advisors and military officials. Private Martinez, the president said warmly, extending his hand. It's an honor to meet you. Your brother's story has been an inspiration to me personally, and to our entire nation. Sarah managed to find her voice. Thank you, Mr. President. Michael would be honored to know that you're presenting his award. I've read the full report of Operation Iron Fist, President Harrison continued. Your brother's actions that day exemplified the very best of American military service. His sacrifice saved 8 lives and demonstrated the kind of heroism that makes our nation proud. The president paused and looked directly into Sarah's eyes. But I also understand that you've been carrying on his legacy of service. Colonel Morrison briefed me on yesterday's events at Fort Henderson. It takes real courage to stand up to harassment and abuse, especially when you're isolated and outnumbered. Sarah was shocked that her situation had reached the president's attention. Sir, I was just trying to do my job and honor my uniform. Exactly, President Harrison said with a smile. Just like your brother. The same values, the same integrity, the same refusal to compromise on what's right. The ceremony itself was held in the East Room of the White House, with about 50 guests in attendance. Sarah's parents had flown in from Texas, and she could see the pride and grief warring in their faces as they took their seats in the front row. Her mother wore Michael's Purple Heart on her lapel, and her father sat ramrod straight in his old Army dress uniform. As the ceremony began, Sarah stood at attention beside her parents while President Harrison read the citation describing Michael's heroic actions. The formal language couldn't capture the reality of what her brother had endured that day, but it honored his sacrifice in a way that made Sarah's heart swell with pride. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity, at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty, the president read, Sergeant Michael Martinez repeatedly exposed himself to enemy fire to rescue wounded comrades, ultimately sacrificing his own life to save that of a fellow service member. When the president placed the Medal of Honor around the framed photograph of Michael in his dress uniform, Sarah's mother began to cry quietly. Sarah reached over and took her hand. drawing strength from the contact. After the formal ceremony, there was a reception where Sarah met families of other Medal of Honor recipients. She was amazed to discover a community of people who understood the complex emotions that came with having a loved one receive the nation's highest military honor, pride mixed with grief, joy tempered by loss, and the overwhelming sense of responsibility that came with carrying on a hero's legacy. "The hardest part," said Mrs. Williams, whose son had received the Medal of Honor posthumously 3 years earlier, "is living up to their example. But you're already doing that by continuing to serve." As the reception wound down, President Harrison approached Sarah once more. "Private Martinez, I have one more thing I'd like to discuss with you, if you don't mind." He led her to a quiet corner of the room where they could speak privately. "Colonel Morrison tells me you're considering applying for a promotion to corporal." "Yes, sir. He encouraged me to think about it." "I think you should do more than think about it," the president said seriously. "The military needs leaders like you. People who understand what real courage looks like, who won't compromise their values under pressure." Sarah felt overwhelmed by the suggestion that she could be a leader in the military. "Sir, I'm still learning so much. I'm not sure I'm ready for that kind of responsibility." "Your brother probably felt the same way before he ran into that valley under enemy fire," President Harrison replied. "Courage isn't the absence of fear or doubt. It's acting in spite of those feelings because it's the right thing to do." He paused and looked out the window at the south lawn. "I'm going to be announcing a new initiative next month focused on combating harassment and discrimination in the military. I'd like you to consider being part of that effort." Sarah's mind reeled. The President of the United States was asking her to help shape military policy. "I know it's a lot to consider," he continued, "but your experience, both the harassment you faced and the strength you've shown in overcoming it, gives you a unique perspective. We need voices like yours to help create real change." Before Sarah could respond, Commander Wells approached to let them know it was time for Sarah to depart for the airport. As she prepared to leave, President Harrison shook her hand once more. "Think about what we discussed, Private Martinez. Your brother changed the lives of 8 soldiers in one day. You have the opportunity to change the lives of thousands of soldiers over many years." The flight back to Fort Henderson gave Sarah time to process everything that had happened. In less than a week, her life had been transformed. She had gone from being a target of harassment to being personally recognized by the President of the United States. But more importantly, she had discovered something about herself that she hadn't known before. She had strength, not just the ability to endure difficulties, but the power to stand up for what was right and inspire others to do the same. When the plane touched down at the base, Sarah saw Colonel Morrison waiting for her on the tarmac. As she descended the aircraft steps, he saluted her with obvious respect. "Welcome back, Private Martinez. How was the ceremony?" "Life-changing, sir," Sarah replied honestly. "Good," Colonel Morrison said with a smile, "because I have a feeling your life is about to change even more. The base has been getting calls all day from news organizations wanting to interview you. Apparently, word has gotten out about both your brother's Medal of Honor and the incident earlier this week." Sarah felt a momentary panic. "Sir, I never wanted this kind of attention. I know you didn't, but sometimes we don't get to choose when we become symbols of something larger than ourselves." Colonel Morrison gestured toward the base buildings. "The choice you have now is what you do with that platform." As they walked toward the administration building, Sarah could see soldiers stopping their activities to watch her pass. Some saluted, others simply nodded respectfully, but all of them looked at her with recognition. She was no longer just another soldier trying to prove herself. She had become something more. Sarah's return to the communications center the next morning was unlike anything she had experienced before. As she walked through the base, soldiers she had never met stopped to salute her or offer words of congratulations. The story of the Medal of Honor ceremony had spread throughout Fort Henderson overnight, and everyone knew who she was. Staff Sergeant Chen greeted her with a warm smile and a fresh cup of coffee. "How does it feel to be famous, Martinez?" "Overwhelming," Sarah admitted. "I just want to get back to work and try to process everything that's happened." "That's exactly what your brother would have said," Chen replied. "But first you need to know that Colonel Morrison wants to see you at 1,000 hours, and there's a stack of interview requests on your desk from news organizations." Sarah looked at the pile of messages with growing anxiety. She had joined the military to serve her country, not to become a public figure. The attention felt like a burden rather than an honor. As she began her morning routine of checking satellite communications with the forward operating bases, Sarah found that the familiar work helped calm her nerves. The soldiers on the other end of the radio didn't care about medals or ceremonies. They just needed reliable communication to stay safe and complete their missions. Base station. "This is Outpost Charlie," came a voice through her headset. "We've got eyes on suspicious movement about 2 clicks northwest of our position. Requesting permission to investigate." Sarah quickly coordinated with command headquarters and relayed the authorization back to Outpost Charlie. For the next hour, she managed communications for a complex reconnaissance mission that ultimately prevented an ambush on a supply convoy. This was the work that mattered, not interviews or public attention, but keeping soldiers alive. At exactly 1,000 hours, Sarah reported to Colonel Morrison's office. She was surprised to find him meeting with a woman in civilian clothes who looked like she could be a reporter. "Private Martinez, I'd like you to meet Janet Richardson from the Washington Post," Colonel Morrison said. "She's writing a story about military families and the impact of the Medal of Honor program." Richardson stood and extended her hand. "Private Martinez, thank you for agreeing to speak with me. I know this must be a difficult time." "Actually, sir," Sarah said to Colonel Morrison, "I haven't agreed to any interviews yet. I'm still trying to figure out how to handle all of this attention." The colonel nodded approvingly. "That's exactly why I wanted Ms. Richardson to meet with you first. She's a veteran herself and understands the complexities of military life. I thought she might help you think through your options." Richardson sat back down and opened a small notebook. "Private Martinez, I spent 8 years in the Navy before becoming a journalist. I've covered military stories for 15 years, and I understand your reluctance to talk to the media." She paused and looked directly at Sarah. "But I also think you should know that your story is already being told, with or without your participation. There are rumors and half-truths circulating about what happened here last week. Wouldn't you prefer that the real story be told accurately?" Sarah felt the familiar knot of anxiety forming in her stomach. "What kind of rumors?" "Some people are saying you used your brother's reputation to get special treatment. Others claim you falsely accused innocent soldiers of harassment to advance your career." Richardson's expression was sympathetic but serious. "Either version is true, but that's what happens when there's a vacuum of accurate information." Colonel Morrison leaned forward. "Ms. Richardson has assured me that any interview would focus on your brother's service and sacrifice, not on the details of last week's incident. The goal is to honor Michael's memory while setting the record straight about your own service." Sarah considered this carefully. The idea of talking to a reporter still made her uncomfortable, but she realized that staying silent might actually do more harm than good. "If I agreed to an interview, what would you want to know?" she asked Richardson. "I'd want to know about Michael as a person, not just as a soldier. What was he like as a brother? What motivated him to serve? How has his death affected your family?" Richardson's voice was gentle but professional. "And I'd want to know about your own decision to serve, and how you've handled the challenges of being a female soldier in a male-dominated environment." Sarah thought about her conversation with President Harrison and his suggestion that she could help create change in the military. Maybe telling her story was part of that responsibility. "If I do this interview, I have some conditions," Sarah said finally. "What are your conditions?" Richardson asked. "First, the focus stays on Michael and his service. Second, if you write about the harassment incident, you make it clear that this problem is bigger than just one person or one base. And third, you include information about resources for other soldiers who might be facing similar problems." Richardson smiled and looked at Colonel Morrison. "She's smart. I can see why you recommended her for promotion." "Promotion?" Sarah looked at the colonel in surprise. "That's the other reason I wanted to meet with you today," Colonel Morrison said. "Your promotion to corporal has been approved, effective immediately. Congratulations, Corporal Martinez." Sarah felt a surge of pride mixed with disbelief. 3 weeks ago, she had been just another soldier trying to prove herself. Now she was a corporal, the sister of a Medal of Honor recipient, and potentially the subject of a major newspaper story. "Sir, I don't know what to say. Say you'll accept the promotion and continue to serve with the same integrity and dedication you've shown so far." Colonel Morrison replied. "The Army needs leaders like you, especially now." After Richardson left with promises to send Sarah a draft of the article before publication, Colonel Morrison asked her to stay for a few more minutes. Corporal Martinez, I want to talk to you about your future in the military. The president mentioned that he'd like you to consider being part of his new anti-harassment initiative. Sarah nodded. He did mention that, sir. I'm still thinking about it. I think you should seriously consider it. You have an opportunity to make a real difference not just for yourself, but for every soldier who faces discrimination or harassment. The colonel's expression grew serious. But I also want to make sure you understand what you'd be getting into. What do you mean, sir? Being the public face of military reform is not an easy job. You'll face criticism from people who don't want change, and you'll carry the hopes of people who desperately need it. There will be times when you'll question whether you're making any difference at all. Colonel Morrison stood and walked to his window. But I've seen what happens when good people refuse to stand up for what's right. I've seen talented soldiers driven out of the military by harassment and discrimination. I've seen careers destroyed and lives ruined because no one was willing to speak up. He turned back to face Sarah. You've already proven that you won't back down when faced with injustice. The question is whether you're willing to take that fight to a larger stage. Sarah thought about her brother and the choice he had made to run toward danger to save others. She thought about President Harrison's words about courage being the willingness to act, despite fear and doubt. Sir, if I agree to be part of this initiative, what would that mean for my military career? It would mean a transfer to Washington, D.C., probably a promotion to sergeant within 6 months, and an opportunity to shape policy that could affect hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Colonel Morrison sat back down. It would also mean giving up the anonymity and quiet service you originally wanted when you enlisted. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to imagine her brother's advice. Michael had never sought the spotlight, but he had never run from responsibility either. When duty called, he answered, regardless of the personal cost. I'll do it, sir, she said quietly. If it can help other soldiers avoid what I went through, then it's worth it. Colonel Morrison smiled with obvious pride. I was hoping you'd say that. I'll contact the Pentagon this afternoon and begin the transfer process. As Sarah left the colonel's office, she realized that her life as a simple communication specialist was over. She was about to become something she had never planned to be. A leader, a symbol, and a voice for change in an institution that desperately needed it. 6 months later, Sergeant Sarah Martinez stood in the Pentagon briefing room, facing a group of senior military officials from all branches of the armed forces. The room was filled with generals, admirals, and colonels who had the power to implement the anti-harassment policies she had been developing. Gentlemen and ladies, Sarah began, her voice steady and confident. What we're proposing isn't just about preventing harassment. It's about creating a military culture where every soldier can focus on their mission instead of defending their right to serve. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of meetings, policy development, and public appearances. Sarah had testified before Congress, spoken at military academies, and worked with legal experts to draft new regulations. The shy communications specialist who had arrived at Fort Henderson was gone, replaced by a confident leader who understood her power to create change. General Patricia Hayes, the highest-ranking woman in the Army, leaned forward. Sergeant Martinez, what kind of resistance have you encountered during your base visits? Honestly, ma'am, less than I expected, Sarah replied. Most soldiers, regardless of rank, want to serve in an environment based on merit and respect. The resistance usually comes from a small minority who see change as a threat to their position or authority. Sarah clicked to the next slide in her presentation, showing statistics from the pilot programs that had been implemented at 5 military bases. At Fort Henderson, where this initiative began, harassment complaints have decreased by 60%. But more importantly, recruitment and retention rates have improved significantly. Admiral Richardson from the Navy spoke up. What about the argument that these policies might make military training less rigorous? Some people worry that protecting soldiers from harassment might also protect them from the tough training they need to be effective in combat. Sarah had heard this objection many times and was ready with an answer. Sir, there's a fundamental difference between demanding excellence and allowing abuse. My brother didn't become a hero because someone harassed him. He became a hero because he was trained to high standards by leaders who respected him as a soldier and a human being. The room was quiet as the senior officials considered her words. Sarah could see nods of agreement from several officers, but she also noticed a few skeptical expressions. Colonel Thompson from the Marines raised his hand. Sergeant Martinez, how do we ensure that these policies don't become tools for false accusations? What safeguards are in place to protect innocent soldiers? That's an excellent question, sir, Sarah responded. The new protocols include thorough investigation procedures, multiple levels of review, and severe penalties for false accusations. But the data shows that false reports are extremely rare, less than 2% of all complaints filed. She clicked to another slide showing testimonials from soldiers at the pilot bases. What we've found is that when soldiers know their complaints will be taken seriously and investigated fairly, they're actually less likely to make frivolous reports. They save their energy for real problems. General Hayes stood up. Sergeant Martinez, I want to commend you on the thoroughness of this presentation and the professionalism you've shown throughout this process. When you first came to our attention, some people wondered if you were the right person to lead this initiative. Sarah felt a momentary flutter of anxiety, wondering if criticism was coming. I'm happy to say that those doubts were completely unfounded, General Hayes continued. You've proven that effective leadership comes from understanding real problems and developing practical solutions, not from having the loudest voice or the highest rank. The general walked over to Sarah and extended her hand. The Joint Chiefs have voted to implement your recommendations across all branches of the military, effective immediately. Sarah felt a wave of relief and accomplishment wash over her. 6 months of hard work, countless meetings, and difficult conversations had finally paid off. After the meeting, Sarah walked outside the Pentagon to call her parents with the news. As she stood looking across the Potomac River toward Arlington National Cemetery, she thought about Michael and how proud he would be of what she had accomplished. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Staff Sergeant Chen back at Fort Henderson. Saw the news announcement. The whole communications team is proud of you. You're changing lives. Another message came from Colonel Morrison. Outstanding work, Sergeant. Your brother would be proud. When are you coming back to visit? As Sarah read through dozens of congratulatory messages, she realized that her network of support had grown far beyond anything she could have imagined. From the president to privates at remote bases, people were invested in her success because they understood what it represented. A few minutes later, a familiar figure approached from the direction of the Pentagon parking lot. It was Major Harper, the pilot Michael had saved during Operation Iron Fist. Sergeant Martinez, he said with a warm smile. I heard about today's vote. Congratulations on changing the entire military. Thank you, sir. It feels surreal. Major Harper looked toward Arlington Cemetery. You know, I visit your brother's grave every month. I always tell him about what you're doing, about how you're carrying on his legacy of protecting people. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. He would probably tell you I'm being too dramatic about the whole thing. Maybe, Harper laughed. But he'd also be incredibly proud. You've taken his example of courage under fire and applied it to a different kind of battlefield. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, both thinking about the soldier whose sacrifice had brought them together. What's next for you? Harper asked. Sarah looked back at the Pentagon, then toward the cemetery where her brother rested. I've been offered a position as special advisor to the Secretary of Defense on military culture reform. It would mean staying in Washington and continuing this work. And I think I'm going to take it. There's still so much work to do. Sarah straightened her uniform and felt the weight of her new responsibilities. Michael ran toward danger to save 8 people. If I can help create a military where every soldier feels safe and valued, maybe I can save thousands. Major Harper saluted her with obvious respect. Then I'd say Sergeant Michael Martinez's little sister has grown up to be exactly the kind of leader this country needs. As Sarah walked back toward the Pentagon, she reflected on how much her life had changed since that terrible day in the administration building at Fort Henderson. She had discovered strengths she didn't know she possessed, found her voice as a leader, and learned that real courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was the willingness to act in spite of fear when something important was at stake. The tattoo on her ribs, which had once been used as a weapon against her, had become a source of strength and inspiration. Every day she carried her brother's memory and his example with her, not as a burden but as a reminder of what it meant to serve with honor and integrity. The military would never be perfect, and there would always be more work to do. But Sarah Martinez had proven that one person with courage and determination could create lasting change. even in the most traditional and resistant institutions. As she entered the Pentagon for another meeting about implementing the new policies, Sarah smiled, knowing that somewhere, Michael was proud of the soldier and leader his little sister had become. The uniform that had once made her a target for harassment had become a symbol of hope and change for soldiers across the country. And in the end, that transformation was perhaps the greatest honor of all.